Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I thought I'd invite you into the garden to join me for the workshop that I did not manage to do at the Whitby Festival. It was supposed to be happening on the 4:30, about 4:30 on the Wednesday of the festival. Unfortunately, that is when my internet connection decided to go on strike. So I've gone in the garden, as you can see, to just sit out here and talk to you about the book, The Secret Stream, and hope that you're not too disappointed with me, or as disappointed as I was with the internet connection when I couldn't meet you live, which is what I really wanted to do. Right, let's get going then. Secret Stream, you might think that's a bit of a strange name for a book, Um, but it isn't really, because the secret stream refers to a constant stream of traditional songs that flows within the travelling community to this day. And you might immediately say, well, why is it secret? Well, the answer to that is that it will remain secret with the travelling people unless you're able to prove yourself to them. And I've had to do that over very, very many years. Of course, I'm married to a Romani gypsy, and that helped enormously. She taught me the gypsy ways, taught me how to behave around travelling people, and I'm glad to say that I've been able to gain the trust of a lot of very, very fine people, some excellent singers as well over the years. That's what we're concerned with here. Um, and then maybe you're allowed to go fishing into that secret stream of songs that they've had for generations. So there we go. So what I will do is just give you an idea a little bit about my background with the Travellers. I'm not going to talk about myself for too long, so please don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is put up a photograph of myself being photographed, or should I say, filmed for Channel 4. There we go. This is a wagon I painted some years ago, and I was, as I say, being filmed for a program called Inside Out, and there you will see the horse. In that case, would you believe is called Rambo? That's the that tells you what he was like. Except he was the most un-Rambo-like horse you've ever met in your life, and that's John the Bear there, who's looking after the horse, and yours truly, a pack up. So there we go. And that's my background as I trained, apart from singing, of course, I'm a trained sign writer and also a wagon painter and all the rest of it. So that's where I come from. That's how I became involved with the travelling people, really for the folklore and for the songs, the singing, but also I managed to get some very, very close friends over the years. Um, Yes, I've always wanted to be an author, and the first book I was involved with, of course, was the Southern Harvest book, where I contributed to that book, which is the republication of the earlier Purslow books, and then, of course, I produced the Southern Songster with Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne and also the very, very excellent Mr. Steve Gardner. And that was quite a success. So I approached my publisher, Clive Bootle, and said, look, I've got a rather interesting brief. And they say the simplest ideas are the best. I said, I would like to do a book that simply puts all the traditional songs collected from travellers in the Victorian and Edwardian period in one place. That was it, just as simple as that. And he said, well, nobody's ever done that before. And he said, I can't believe that nobody's ever done it. I said, yes. So if we can find out how many songs were collected, how many of them are, we obviously can't publish them all, but those will make a selection from that and put it out as a collection. He said, well, we want 2 volumes. And I said, what's that? He said, well, volume 1 can be the Edwardian Victorian period, and then volume 2 can be the later songs, some of the songs you collected yourself. So my work was cut out, wasn't it? Well, we've got as far as volume 1, which is going to be published in September. If you're watching this and it is September, it may well be out. Clive Bootle is the publisher, and you'll be able to get the book online or pre-order the book as well. So the purpose of this workshop is to give you some an insight into some of the eye openers that I had while I was compiling this book, The Secret Stream. And the collectors, well, I mean, they're the ones you'd expect. There was, of course, Cecil Sharp, Ralph Vaughan Williams, Ella Leather, Dr. George Gardner, and I think Henry Hammond as well, collected one or two songs from the Travellers. And also, of course, the lovely Lucy Broadwood, who did as well. The towering figure above them all, of course, is Cecil Sharp. Wouldn't he just be? Um, Still a controversial figure to this day. I'm not going into that too closely. I will mention that I think a lot of the criticism that has been aimed at Sharp has been discounted, or should we say, if you like, negated by further research. And I think a lot of the Let's Knock Cecil Sharp Brigade are now only a footnote in the history of research into folk song. Now, what I will say, having said that, what I will say about Cecil Sharp is that he was, how can I say, a little inaccurate, not with his collecting in any respect at all, but with his stories about how he met and how he collected from the gypsy folk. Now, this may sound like sacrilege, but it really, really isn't. And I'm going to try and explain that. So we'll start with Cecil Sharp, but we'll be returning to him later on because his collection is fascinating in more than one ways. Right, well, let's have a look at a photograph then. This is coming up directly now, is Priscilla Cooper. And here she is, Priscilla Cooper. Now, we've got an interesting story about Priscilla Cooper. This is Sharp's story of his brush with death inside a gypsy caravan. Wow. Okay, well, this is the story according to Fox Strangeways. And in my opinion, it doesn't really stand up to examination, but I'm going to read it for you now. He, that's Cecil Sharp, was noting songs by phonograph from a woman in a caravan, this will be Priscilla Cooper, when suddenly she stopped singing and turning deathly white, announced that she'd heard her husband approaching, and as he was of a jealous disposition, she was afraid that he would kill Mr. Sharp, and Mr. Sharp didn't want to be killed, and there was nothing for it but to present a bold face. Now, this all happened round about Christmas time, you see. Opening the caravan door, he was busily recording Priscilla Cooper on phonograph. Opening the caravan door, he shouted to the man, "A happy Christmas to you. Stop a moment and listen. I've got your wife's voice in a box." The man was so amazed and delighted that he forgot to kill Mr. Sharp, and instead they became great friends. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with the best will in the world, I won't say that I don't believe a single word of it, but I don't believe most of it. And this is why. First and foremost, the wagon that Priscilla Cooper was in, I'm not going to go into too many details, and you're not here for a lecture on wagons. She couldn't have heard her husband coming if the door was shut, unless he arrived in a 4x4 very noisily, or a tractor, which probably he didn't in 1907. So, okay, well, we'll get past. Say he had a very noisy dray. If he was a homicidally jealous, I'm telling you now that Priscilla Cooper would never have allowed Sharp inside the caravan in the first place. On a positive note, I am absolutely convinced that they did have the conversation about I've got your wife's voice in a box. But I'm almost certain that Mr. Cooper was approached first by Sharp and played a voice in a box and said, "I'm going to put your wife's voice in the box." And he was amazed and he was delighted, and I'm sure they did become great friends. So let's discount that particular, well, should we say discount 50% of that particular narrative there about Sharp's meeting with Priscilla Cooper. Now then, if we look at Cecil Sharp's letter to his wife Constance, This is all about his meeting with Betsy Holland. Well, let's see if we can get Betsy Holland up. And here she is, Betsy Holland. Right, you listen to this one. This is even better. It was a letter to his wife, this. So consequently, it's not really meant for publication. Neither is it meant for me to read out to you, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's worth noting that on this visit to Betsy Holland, he was, that is Sharp, was accompanied by the Reverend Francis Etherington on a bicycle. So there he was, a vicar on a bicycle. This is how he wrote to his wife. Yesterday, after taking down many songs from Old Parish, I'm not sure who that is, a singer, okay, we went on to Simmons Bath, where I wrote to you. We had decided to make our way over the moor to Withypool, and were just wheeling our cycles up the hill when Etherington, Reverend, gave a penny to a very dirty but picturesque little child, who took it and ran to a small cart that was under a tree down a little lane, and gave it to his father, evidently a gypsy. So I went up to him and chatted and broached the question of songs. No, he didn't sing, but his wife did, and she was in a house close by trying to sell some crockery. We waited and gave him baccy and played with the second child, a baby, tied up in the cart. Tied up, eh? Presently out came his wife, Betsy Holland, aged 26, a bright, dark-eyed woman. The baby cooed with delight directly she appeared, and we attacked her about songs which she had learned from her grandmother. A little persuasion, and she sat down on a stone, gave her baby the breast, and then began a murder song. Talk about folk singing. It was the finest characteristic bit of singing I have ever heard. Ladies and gentlemen, I really, really do not believe a single word of that. I'm sorry I don't. First and foremost, okay, Sharp was writing to his wife. There is no woman in this day and age who would sit on a stone or anything else in the middle of the street and do something as intimate as feed a baby in front of a man of the cloth on a bicycle watching on. Never mind a stranger from a different class, if you like to go with that word, and we are talking about Victorian times, as Sharp. No, 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 it never happened, did it? It really did not happen. I actually read this account to some gypsy friends of mine, and they said, "Oh, not, never in the memory of man." I don't think that would happen in this day and age. Never mind in 1900, 780, whatever it was. So there we go. It is interesting to note that Evelyn V. Clark gave a completely different account of the meeting suggested by the letter from Sharp, and she said that, well, Mrs. Cooper was actually in a tent, and there is a photograph of Betsy Holland, sorry, not Mrs. Cooper, Betsy Holland in a tent, and I think that's how they met. Now, why did Sharp do that? Well, like a lot of people, he was in favour of a bit of drama, make it a bit more interesting. And so he's one of these people who, I guess, would never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So that's all well and good. And when you get right down to it, no real harm has been done to the songs, maybe to our image of what it was like to collect from travelling people. Having done a fair bit of collecting myself, I can tell you it's what it is hard work. And it really isn't as dramatic as we've heard from Cecil Sharp. But I am prepared to forgive him. I doubt whether many people are worried whether I forgive him or not. But for the purposes of this book, I do forgive him on that one. So now let's move on to Ella Leather, who worked with Cecil Sharp, in fact. And I think I've got a photograph of Ella Leather to put up. So let's see what we can do here. And here she is, Ella Leather. Strikingly attractive woman. Well, I know that's subjective, isn't it? But it's important in the terms of the stories I'm going to tell you. She was a solicitor's wife. And why I'm laughing is solicitors still are persona non grata with the travelling community. You don't walk on to a gypsy camp very easily at all if you are wearing a suit and carrying a clipboard or a solicitor or anything else to do with the how shall we say, the ruling classes, if we're going to be political about it. But you know what I mean. Um, well, Mrs. Leather wasn't like that. In fact, she was actually, I believe, a very nice woman and intent on collecting songs and tunes from the travellers. So intent was she in collecting those songs that she was prepared to do what I said at the beginning of this workshop, and that is prove herself to gain the trust of the travellers. And she had to make lots of visits to the different camps. Now, this all took place in Herefordshire, and the camp, as I remember, was at the Hom, which is, I don't know exactly where it is. I have been told, but I'm afraid I've forgotten. She went to the Hom, and there were the Price Jones families and Smiths, all sort of families camped there together. But to gain the trust of the travellers, she rolled up her sleeves and worked alongside the gypsy folk as a hop picker, which is about as dedicated as you can possibly get, I think. So that she did, and we have to respect her for that, because this was around about 1911, 1912. Well, the social divide, I'm afraid, was still apparent with the travellers. He did have some success with collecting tunes, and I'll bring back Cecil Sharp into this as well, because Cecil Sharp also collected tunes from the Gypsy Fiddlers. Ella Leather collected songs from the Locke family, or at least John Locke, and then Cecil Sharp collected from Tom and Henry Cave, and that was in Somerset, I believe. And this was all rather interesting. So these are included in the book. Now, who better for me to approach to do a section on this particular area of the book, the tunes, than Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne. And so I'm going to hand over to him for a couple of minutes, and he can let you know his view.
In the forthcoming Secret Stream songbook, alongside a selection of traditional songs, we've also got a handful of traditional tunes that were collected by Cecil Sharp in the early 20th century from 3 different gypsy fiddle players. And in my short portion, I'll be talking a little bit about those 3 fiddle players and the tunes and some interesting musical characteristics that come with those tunes. Now, the first 2 gypsy fiddle players that I'll be talking about are Tom Cave and his son Henry Cave. And the Cave family were travellers in the Somerset area in southwest England. And from their tunes in Sharp's manuscripts, we can tell that they're pretty proficient fiddle players. There are some quite complex tunes, and Sharp's manuscripts are sort of adorned with some interesting ornamentation as well. So we can assume that they were quite competent fiddle players. And interestingly, the repertoire of the Cave family seems to be quite unique. I've not been able to track down variants of many of their tunes in other printed or manuscript sources, or in recordings of other traditional musicians at the turn of the 20th century. So that leads me to believe that some of these tunes were perhaps locally written or just locally known, not particularly common tunes. And a lot of them to that end have quite generic titles. There are a lot of them that are called just Country Dance or Sailor's Hornpipes. So yes, quite unique tunes there in the Cave family. Most of the tunes fit the standard jig, hornpipe, polka, rhythm and structure that we're familiar with in traditional tunes. But there's one notable exception, I think, and that's in Tom Cave's Country Dance number 5, which has a usual 16-bar A part, but the B part is just 15 bars long, so that means the phrasing's a little bit weird. Now, it is possible that this is a mistake in notation from Cecil Sharp, but I think it's equally possible that this is actually how Tom Cave played it, and we can see throughout the English traditional repertoire that often traditional musicians did have these slightly quirky phrase structures. Anyway, I'll play this tune for you a little bit and listen out for that slightly odd second section. Now, as I said, most of the Cave family repertoire does seem to be quite unique, although we do see variants amongst their tunes of some quite well-known tunes. And the second tune that I'm going to share with you comes from Henry Cave this time, and it's a variant of the well-known tune Haste to the Wedding. Now this version differs slightly from the standard version, and it brings up quite an interesting second point in the gypsy repertoire, and that's the use of notes outside of the standard major scale. Now this one features sharpened fourths, which is quite interesting, and there is an argument that sharpened fourths were used quite commonly by traditional English fiddle players, but it also features sharpened firsts, which is something that I've not seen in too many tunes. Anyway, I'll play it for you quickly, and you'll hear hopefully those sharpened firsts and fourths. So that was Henry Cave's version of Haste to the Wedding Air with those sharpened firsts, which, as I say, are quite unusual. I've not seen those too many times in tunes. And with those sharpened fourths, which are perhaps a little bit more common. And yeah, Cecil Sharp in English folk songs, some conclusions, so that there was a tendency among English fiddle players to have those sharpened fourths in their tunes, perhaps as an influence from the Lydian mode. Now, staying on the topic of scales and keys, I think transcribing these tunes as I have and looking at them in detail has thrown up a couple of interesting points about key signatures. And I know that key signatures in the English traditional tune repertoire is something that has been discussed quite a bit. Nowadays, if you go to just about any traditional English tune session, the key of G will certainly be asserting its dominance due to the presence of the ubiquitous DG melodians, but we're fairly certain that this wasn't always the case in the English traditional repertoire. And in this cross-section of tunes that I've got for the Secret Stream songbook, we can see that actually the key of G isn't the most common. In fact, it's the key of A that shows up most in these tunes, with 44% of the tunes being in A. G and D, fairly common in these tunes, 29 and 18% respectively. And then the remaining tunes are in A Dorian and E, with 6% and 3% respectively. But I think it's interesting that all the key signatures that crop up do seem to prioritise open strings on the fiddle, so certainly suggesting some level of instrument-specific key signatures there. Now, the final fiddle player that I'm going to discuss is the fiddle player John Locke from Lempster in Herefordshire. And Ella Mary Lever actually saw John Locke playing at Pembridge Fair in 1908 and sort of introduced Locke to Cecil Sharp in 1909. And Sharp was really quite impressed with Locke's fiddle playing and with their meeting. And I'm going to read a little quote from Ella Mary Lever on Sharp's meeting with Locke. She commented, "Mr. Sharp was delighted with his tunes and with his playing, and wished he could take him to London for the folk dances he was reviving there. We are very fortunate, though, in the case of John Locke, that a recording of his very skilled playing does survive, and I'm just going to play a clip from John Locke's polka here, so that you can hear some of his wonderful playing. Now, a final point of interest that I think comes up with these gypsy fiddle tunes is the question of origin. Besides two variants of the ubiquitous Tudor classic green sleeves that feature in the repertoires of John Locke and also in the Cave family, quite a lot of the tunes seem to be quite 19th century in origin in terms of their melodic shape and their rhythms. So I think quite a lot of them are quite recent. But as I said, particularly with the Cave family, but also to an extent with Locke, quite a lot of them are quite hard to trace in written sources. But we do know that at least two of them have their origins in minstrel tunes, and this was quite a common practice in dance circles, the use of song tunes as dance tunes. And from John Locke's repertoire, we have two tunes, such as Getting Upstairs, which is a minstrel tune, and Not for Joe, which for some reason in the Sharp manuscripts is called Sheepskins, which is the name of another well-known dance tune, and perhaps is the name of a dance that that the Not for Joe tune was associated with. Perhaps that's where that title comes in. But both Such a Getting Upstairs and Not for Joe are well-known minstrel tunes with minstrel lyrics to them. And I'm just going to leave you with a quick rendition of John Locke's Getting Upstairs.
Well, thank you so much to Cohen for that. I want to actually put it on record right here and now. So, what an incredible asset Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne has been to both books I've been involved in. He set all the music, as he rightly said there, and he has an alarming amount of knowledge when it comes to music. I am 70 years old, and he isn't 70 years old, but I often find myself referring to him when I get stuck on a tune as to the modality of it or the way it should be presented. So once again, a big thank you to Cohen, and a lot of respect too. I think you'll agree, Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne, and thank you for that little bit he took the trouble to record. Well, he mentioned Ella Leather and he mentioned John Locke. Um, I would actually tell you a little story about Ella Leather when she was visited by John Locke, and this is quite an interesting story, which I do believe actually. This one, yes, they lived. That is the Leather family lived in Weebly, and he would arrive with John Locke, and to announce his arrival in Weebly, he used to travel around with 30 donkeys in scarlet harness, the whole family did. And they would arrive and he would play his fiddle underneath Mrs. Leather's window. And on one occasion, she was having a bit of a get together with some friends, a bit of a party, and John Locke was invited inside to play for them. Now, that's all well and good, but I think you'll remember I mentioned the divide, the social divide between travellers and the likes of solicitors and solicitors' wives. Mrs. Locke, John's wife, was understandably perturbed a bit by her husband's interest in the rather alluring Mrs. Adelaide. And so, excuse me, this needs coughing about because she actually made a visit to Mrs. Anna Leather to find out exactly what was going on, which of course was nothing at all, but she didn't know that. And it's worth mentioning that the majority of travellers, if not all of them in those days, were illiterate, because it's quite important to this story for when she arrived and knocked on Mrs. Leather's door. The maid was the person who answered the door to Mrs. Locke and asked her for what she wanted. Anyway, she said, "Well, I'd like to see Mrs. Locke, if that's okay." Well, the maid said, "Well, no, you can't. She's resting. What's this gypsy doing, daring to come knocking at our door?" Well, this didn't suit Mrs. Locke in the slightest, so she then asked for a piece of paper. And the maid believed that she was asking for the piece of paper so she could write a note to Mrs. Leather. Well, of course, Mrs. Locke wasn't able to write. She had other things in mind, and she proceeded to tear the paper up into small squares in front of the rather quizzical maid. Then she put one piece of paper in each corner of a basket she was carrying, north, south, east, and west. And then, muttering strange invocations, proceeded to put the rest of the pieces of paper, squares of paper, on the doorstep and on the windowsill. Anybody who knows anything at all about travellers will know this is a form of cursing. What you have to do is to obtain a piece of property from the recipients of the gypsy curse. I mean, you can cut a little bit off their clothing or something that belongs to them, and you then impregnate it with your will and bury it, or in this case, place it on the windowsill and the doorstep, and then wander off up the road, muttering to yourself. I'll leave it to you to whether you believe that the curse has worked or not. I'm not going into that because you'd be surprised what I think. There we go. I shall leave you wondering about that one. Well, the terrified maid swept up the pieces of paper and chucked them in the fire. I don't think she actually came and told Mrs. Leather, but I will say that the hatchet was buried between Mrs. Locke and Mrs. Leather at a later date when they met again, and Mrs. Locke realised there was nothing untoward in her husband's interest, and probably heard the recordings that the recording that we've just heard when Cohen played it. So Eleanor was then attempting to collect against a hostile background. So it's no real surprise at all that she only really had any success with the male members of the family she visited. The females remained stubbornly silent, except for carols, and they sang a number of carols. By now, she was being joined by Ralph Vaughan Williams. This is about 1912 by now. And the story of their visits to the Hom in Herefordshire is taken up by Mrs. Leather in her notes, where he puts the following narrative. Okay, we all sat down upon upturned buckets. Upturned buckets, that must have been comfortable, mustn't it? We all sat down upon upturned buckets, kindly provided for us by the gypsies, while Dr. Vaughan Williams noted down the tune. His wife and I noted down alternate lines of the words. It's difficult to convey to those who've never known it the joy of hearing folk songs as we heard that ballad. This would have been The Unquiet Grave, by the way, sung by Alfred Price Jones. The difference between hearing it there, that's at the gypsy camp, the difference between hearing it there and in the drawing room or a concert hall is just that between discovering a wild flower growing in its native habitat and admiring it when transplanted into a botanical garden. And there you have it, really. That's the problem. Mrs. Leather has, in her own words, outlined the biggest problem when dealing with the gypsy folk. Despite her joy and admiration, to my experienced travelling community are not wildly partial to being treated as noble, unlettered savages in their native environment. That sounds a bit harsh, I know, but the social divide in Edwardian England, it was just too wide. And so Mrs. Leather was a victim of that divide, as much was Alfred Price Jones. Actually, Ralph Vaughan Williams himself has got something to say on the subject as well, and of his visit on that night. He says, it was a cold, clear September night, and we were by the blazing fire in an open ground of the gypsy encampment. The fire had been specially lighted to enable us to note down the words and tunes. That's in the growing darkness. Then out of the half light came a beautiful tenor voice singing The Unquiet Grave. Well, yeah, okay. Let's be honest here. The fire was not lighted to honour Ralph Vaughan Williams or anybody else. It was lit so they could actually cook some food to feed the kids. That's why it was lit there, not because of their arrival. That said, we have to have a word about Ralph Vaughan Williams' notation. Unfortunately, although he was sat on an upturned bucket in the semi-darkness, it cannot be excused. His notation is at best a wild scrawl, at worst a set of barely legible hieroglyphics. He then forgot to note down the name of the singer, or didn't know it, or wasn't interested in it, I don't know. and were just right at a 45-degree angle at the side of the piece of paper. Gypsy spelt depressingly with a lowercase g. He even sometimes didn't write down the name of the song, or maybe he did afterwards. Um, to be fair, on the positive side, his notation was accurate. It all works out. It's been a bit of a detective story to actually marry up the tune with the right singer, but I think we have done it. And there is a large section of songs from the Herefordshire gypsy folk, which encompass some very, very interesting singers. I have been going on for quite a while, so what I do want to do is to move on. Right, I want to move on to George Gardner, who collected in the New Forest from the New Forest Gypsies. It was the Cole family and the Dow family with whom he managed to find in the New Forest. There were a lot of other travelling families there as well, I know for a fact. But I've managed to discover a photograph of one of the better informants that Gardner found, and that his name was Goliath Cole. And there he is, sat with his wife Julia. Now there's a name to conjure with, isn't it? Goliath Cole. Well, understandably, he decided that he was going to change his name from Goliath to Gilbert. But the family called him Gilly Cole, and Gilly Cole, the word Gilly or Gil is a singer. That's the Romany word for singer. And he sang the Oakham Poachers, which you may be familiar with. He's been recorded by, that was his version has been recorded by John Kirkpatrick and also Chris Foster, I believe. The Oakham Poachers, there's the man. I was very, very lucky to come across that photograph. What it does do, I'm now sort of going to run out of time if I don't get to the point here, but I do want to take a bit of time out to talk about the Romany language and songs in the Romany language. The first collector ever to have collected songs directly from the travelling people, of course, was George Borrow. We'll put a photograph of him up in a minute, but I want to talk about Cecil Sharp, who's the man who collected songs from most of the Somerset travellers and Devon travellers we've mentioned here, also some of the Hereford ones, as you've heard as well. But he was the very first collector to take down a song in the Romany language, and that song was called Rockadown Romanesh. That was the name of the song, Rockadown Romanesh. And it does actually, it actually underlines a problem that still exists to this day with those who speak Anglo-Romany. Now, let me explain. What we actually hear as the Romany language from travellers today really isn't the Romany language. This has been made plain to me by my friends from the Lee family, who actually speak deep Romany. They actually speak Romany without any English words in it, and Romany without any slang words in it, or 19th, 18th, and 19th century cant. So the word cant refers to a whole area of language that was spoken by the underclasses, if you want to call it that. I don't like these terminologies much, but those who were out on the street and earning a living the best they could. Beggars, yes. People posing as gypsies, which we still get a lot of today, believe you me. And various other people who are out there, doxies. I'm not going to go into too much of that. It's a whole separate workshop. But they were all able to speak a sort of what in languages have been broadly called cant. They were referred to as the canting crew. In fact, there is a dictionary of cant words called the Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, which was produced in 1811. Well, today you will find that the Romany, so-called Romany, is what the real Romany speakers call barrow boy talk or flash patter. And it's a mixture of some Romany words, some non-Romani words and English words, and cant words, I say when I say non-Romani. So you get a strange mixture. So the tune that Cecil Sharp, which was actually a tuning, and there's a whole section in the Secret Stream book, a book about tunings, is effectively a dance where you get a bit of vocables of various sorts mixed in with some words. You maybe get, I'll just see if I can do a bit. So you get some English words and some mouth music. So you get skip it up, me pretty boy, skip it up, me darlings, skip it up, me pretty boy, skip it up, me darlings, skip it up, me pretty boy, skip it up, me darlings. Well, I done go and he showed us good time. Raddle a diddle a daddle a diddle a raddle a diddle a daddle a diddle, and so you go. Well, that's a tuning out, tootling out, mouth music, whatever you want to call it at all. And there are lots of terminologies used by folklorists and by gypsies. So Sharp took down this particular song tuning called Rockadown Romanesque Fake to the Bosh. So I'll put that into English, but I have to explain that it is a very good example of what I've just been talking about. So Rockadown Romanesque, right? So Rocka is a gypsy word, a Romany word. It means speak. Rocker down is English. I don't need to tell you that. Romanesque or Romani. So that means rocker down, speak down. Romani is literal translation. It means keep your voice down, Romani. Huh? Then we get another word, fake. Now that's a word that we know today as being a dishonest reproduction of fake, or maybe even you're faking your way through something. You're putting on a front, pretending you know something when you actually don't. You're a faker. Okay, so fake. But in the I'd say in the 18th, 19th century, fake was a word used by the travellers and still is today for dance. Okay, so we've got keep your voice down, Romany, and dance to the bosh. Well, people think that bosh is actually the Romany word for a fiddle or a violin. No, it's not. It is another cant word. And it's actually taken from the Persian, would you believe? Bosh means two things. It means rubbish, and we still use that, or certainly maybe it's just a little archaic now. You're talking a load of bosh, okay? It means rubbish, but it's used as also fake to the bosh means dance to the fiddle. And a boshamengro is again a mixture of Romany. Engro means man, and bosh is a slang word for a fiddle, which is a slang word in itself for a violin. So boshamengro is a man who plays the fiddle. So that first line is absolutely typical of the mixture of Romany, English, and cant. Keep your voice down, Romany, and dance to the fiddle. The song goes on to say that you've got to keep your voice down because there's a very nice box of tools over there which can get off that Gorgia man, that man who lives in a house, and get him to sell them to me. So that's it. And then it's just a little rhyme. And then there's the Mr. Stanley who sang the song, Tom Stanley, was dancing as well as he sang that to Cecil Sharp. God bless Cecil Sharp for noting it down. He did do, and it's in the book. But now I want to move on to Mrs. Alice Gillington. And there she is, Alice Gillington. Well, it's not Alice Gillington herself. There's not enough photograph exists of that, but it's Alice Gillington in her caravan. The one in front is the one with the smoke coming out the top, is the one she lived in. The one behind it, which looks a little bit more primitive, is her brothers. And they did go out and camp with the travellers, but you'll notice they're not camped with them there. They camped when they fancied camping with them. It's not the world's best photograph. There is a slightly better one in the book, I believe, which I don't have at the moment. But you'll see in a gypsy caravan, so we'll stop that and move on about the lady. She was much the same as Ella Leather in many respects, except Ella Leather was more workmanlike in her approach to collecting songs. Alice Gillington was a bit of a complex character. She was a spinster and lived in the wagon. For the most part, she got most of the songs that she collected in Romany incorrect. She didn't get them right. She also took down words that the Romanis would not necessarily say in public. and also she took down some songs that were, how can I say, uh, she didn't really understand the context in which they were being sung. But I think the best one is when she's took down a version of Mandy Went to Move the Grier, which in English means I went to put the horse in the field. Now that covers a whole multitude of songs that were collected from the Travellers with all the different words and all of them in Anglo-Romany cant. However, the general gist of it is the idea that I was approached by a policeman in the field. He asked me to move on, and I didn't want to move on, so I hit him. That's actually wasn't it fun? And now I'm going to disappear off with my Romany Rackley, my Romany wife, my Romany girl, and we're going to hide from the police. That's what it's about. And it's a light-hearted song. And in the middle of the one that Alice Gillington collected, she came out with the line "Sap me dirry datchen, can't the mush core well," which is virtually, a lot of that is absolutely rubbish. What it's supposed to say is, "Oh my God, can't the policeman fight, or the man fight well?" Because he's in a fight with a policeman, you see. And what she used there was "sap me dirry datchen," which doesn't mean a lot. Sap is a word that gypsies won't use. It's a bad word, and it actually means snake. That's what it is. That you call a snake. It's a bad word, like we would say a swear word. In French, it would be merde or something like that, wouldn't it? So I mean, and it means midiridaction. It's actually a word which is really saying is "my dear father." It's a very obscure word for father, but it's meaning that in terms of as we would pray in a church. So it's really another way of saying, "Oh, bad word, my God, can't the policeman fight well?" So she spelled it all wrong. I mean, even the word that we do know, like chavvy, she made it romantic by, instead of spelling it Chavi, she spelt it PSC something or other, to make it sound like it came from a Latin sort of origin or something, which it obviously didn't. Um, and she did collect the songs, though, so God bless her for that. There are a few in there. I've had to, with the help of the Lee family and with Mr. and Mrs. Lee, Walter Lee, has helped me, who's a full Romany speaker, translate some of the words, and because some of them just simply didn't exist and were made up or what have you. But at least she got the tunes. At least she did take down the words. But she was a bit of a strange character. But for reasons of brevity, I'm going to move on to talk about George Borrow. And there is George Borrow, 1803 to 1881. And of course, George Borrow produced the book, the Romani Lavo or the English Gypsy Language. And when I say produced, that's exactly a lot of the time what he did do. He produced his own version of Romany in that. I must say that there's a lot of good in his book. There's a lot of stuff that's obviously made up. He has a section marked Romany songs or English Romany songs, and the majority of them you can see that what he's actually done is write them himself. Or taken them from other writers and then translated them into very bad Anglo-Romany cant. I mean, George Borrow, if he didn't have a word for, say, only, he would use the word for one and put ly next to it. So yek is one in Romany. So he'd actually create a word like yekli for only. I think the worst one is a Romany love song, which he wrote himself. And the line goes like this: "I'd choose as pillows for my head those snow white breasts of thine." Right, well, he might do, but he actually translated it into his own version of Romany, which goes like this: "Corny Burks, my men angry will be," which actually translates as "water breasts, my neck thing will be." So it's virtually and totally meaningless. I think what I am going to do is just to tell you a little bit more about Borrow, and then we'll draw this to a close. And that is, Well, the Romani linguist Ian Hancock observes that few figures in Romany studies have been so roundly praised nor yet so heartily criticised as George Borrow, which more or less sums it up. For my money, George Borrow was more interested in himself than he was in the people he was collecting from, and he actually wrote poems about himself. Well, one poem in particular called "Honest 6'3". Just to give you an idea, I'll just quickly do a verse. This is what George Borrow wrote about himself. A lad who 20 tongues can talk and 60 miles a day can walk, drink at a draught a pint of rum, and then be neither sick nor dumb, and so it goes. Such is on his 6'3". So there you are, there you have it. Let's face it, the academic world, the musical world, it's absolutely full of egos. You can trip up over them plenty of times if you transgress their rules and regulations. So then again, you get some wonderful people as well who help you and give their time to you. And I've had that because I've not had that much formal education. Anything I've done, I've learnt myself, even how to talk to you now, as opposed to having this very thick South London accent. And I managed to get myself a job with the BBC, which helped me enormously as a radio broadcaster. So I'm back talking about myself again. That's fun, isn't it? Well, I will say that the Victorian Edwardian collections encompassed about 37 to 40 singers. There are a couple of doubts there when names are missing, and about 170 songs. That's not counting the tunes. Most of them are in Secret Stream, and I'd like to take it from you. I'd like you to take it from me, even that the Secret Stream is still flowing. Well, there's a little drink here that's flowing my way, and I'm going to give you a song from the book. Here's one collected by Ralph Vaughan Williams to finish off with. It was collected from Mr. Loveridge, and once again in Herefordshire. I must obey, I can no longer tarry. That river I must cross, over high hills and burning mountains, until I reach the arms of my true lass. When I came to me true love's window, I leant high low upon a stone, and through a pane I whispered softly, my true lover, is you at home? Oh, who is that all at my window, disturbing me from my night's rest? Who should it be but your own true lover? Rise up, darling, and let me in. I am fatigued by my long journey. Besides, I'm wetter to the skin. So soon did rise that fair young creature, with prime speed be done and let me in. Her two breasts like snow in winter, her two cheeks like the rose in June, and her two eyes like stars a shining on a winter's night when it freezes too. And there we worn our love together till that long night was turning day. Till that long night had come to morning. Then I took my leave, and I went my